Well, it looks like we're recording, so that's a good thing. I'm going to sit down here at the table for a little bit. We're going to... What are we going to do here? We're starting the first chapter of the book today, actually, according to the syllabus. You should have turned in a report at some point on the engineering videos that you watched. The first assignment was to watch 60 minutes worth of engineering video. It doesn't have to be one video, it can be many videos. And to make a report about a page, which videos you watched, where you watched them, what they were about, what you learned from them, what was exciting about them, kind of your thoughts and ideas, things that you learned about engineering from these videos. And now we're going to get into the textbook, and we're going to cover chapter 1 today and learn a little bit about engineering from our book. It's got some good stuff in it as well. I want to look at something really quick to see if this is what I think it is. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys a little history of engineering slideshow. It's kind of a fun one. Let's get this thing up on the screen so you can see it. Now this slideshow I did not make. I found it and I liked it, so I stole it. Stole it from a guy named Dr. Hornstein, who's teaching a class similar to this called Engineering 1, wherever he teaches at. Made this a couple of years ago. And oops. There we go. Maybe. There we go. So here is the brief history of engineering slideshow. They got this great picture of the pyramids being built, right, out in Giza. And I'm going to switch this to the full screen version here. Nope, that's not it either. View, full screen. There we go. So we have a brief history of engineering, and we start off with the beginnings of engineering and this great timeline throughout the entire ages and apes turning into humans and everything else, right? Engineering is timeless. It actually happened before time started being recorded as time, right? However you think about evolution of man or the evolution of the earth, at some point somebody started figuring things out. They started figuring out how to make tools out of stones or bones or rocks, or stones and rocks being, different things, really. Or sticks or whatever. And it moved on from there. Eventually somebody decided they wanted to move something heavy, started using a lever. They realized that even a wheel would be even better, or rolling things. I mean, engineering is, and certainly was, the first manifestation of intelligence on Earth. And mankind is not the only being on Earth that has ever engineered anything. Plenty of animals have engineered things. Today you can go and find monkeys that use a little needle-like piece of kind of like a reed to extract termites from wood. And you can find other animals that, they use all kinds of little, very basic tools, and they don't even have opposable thumbs sometimes. So engineering is something that has always been a part of nature, the natural evolution of intelligence. The more intelligent creatures using it more often, the less intelligent creatures using it less often. A lot of people love to talk about how dolphins and whales are among the most intelligent creatures on Earth. Well, in my opinion, not so. They have not developed tools, and you can't really develop true intelligence until you begin to develop tools. Why is that? Well, the reason is because once you begin to develop tools, you actually stop evolving. Your evolution slows down on a physical level, and your mental evolution speeds up. Right? Tools eliminate the need for physical evolution. They begin chipping away at the need to, for example, have fur on your body. Or they chip away at the need for you to be hunched over down low to the ground. They eliminate the need for some of the things that are necessary for animals to survive. Right? Humans don't have those necessities anymore because we began making tools, which was an evolution of our mind, which meant we didn't need to evolve anymore physically. And we began to become a species that physically has some defects, quite honestly. Physically, we're not very good at doing some very specialized tasks that other animals can do very well. They can run at really high speed, for example, like a cheetah can. Fastest top human speed is around 30 miles an hour. Cheetah's at around 65. Right? However, a cheetah can't, grind up its dinner and make hamburgers. Can't cook the hamburgers and, have cheese that's made from the cow and do all the great things we can do. But those are all things done with tools and the mind, whereas the running is done purely physical. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you think about it in terms of the natural evolution of species and nature in general. Why do we study this? Right? Pay attention to this class and you won't be as easily fooled as your parents. That really is the reason that we study engineering history. Is so that we can know what has happened before and not make the same mistakes and not try to reinvent the wheel every time we turn around. All right? Test. We want to see the progress. I was reading it as test. We want to see the progresses that we made. We want to know the innovations that are going to help us. We don't want to repeat mistakes, right? We want to know where we're going, so we have to know where we've been. Lots of these things are really valid things, right? But it's all saying the same thing, right? It's all saying the same thing. We want to move forward, so we got to understand what's happened so far. What are some of the more early innovations in engineering, right? We've already mentioned the stone tools and stick tools, wooden tools often included things like spears, hammers, slings. Mostly they were weapons for hunting or tools for dealing with what they hunted, right? Sometimes they were for defense. Later on they got more and more complicated, right? So that's right down here, hunting tools and weapons. But then further along we had the wheel and fire. Shelter and homes were right about that time, right, as well. Those early on things. Clothing came up pretty early as our bodies started not being so furry maybe, and we needed to be warmer. And then we started to get further and further up the hill, I guess you could think of it as. More and more advanced, right? 10,000 BC, as far as we can tell, about the time when spears started to become they started to become more and more advanced. They were trying to figure out how to make them really advanced, and they came up with this thing called the atlatl, which is a spear thrower. And you can see it here on the end of the spear. It's this little handle here, and this handle is not attached to the spear. It's just got a little lip on the end that kind of pushes it back into the spear. So as you're holding this spear on the atlatl, and you throw it, you let go of the spear and you hang onto the atlatl, and you can throw the end of that spear another foot or two longer. So in other words, your arm, your hand, and the force from your arm has contact with that spear longer. With this thing, they went from being able to kill a mammoth from about 5 meters away, and if they had about 10 or 20 people, they could kill a mammoth with 10 or 20 spears, normal spears that they were just throwing with their arm. With the atlatl, that increased that range 4-fold, 5-fold, 25 meters sometimes. They could throw these spears and still kill the mammoth, and they could use fewer people to do it. because the spears went deeper in and killed faster. I've actually used these things. They're really quite amazing. I know a guy that killed an elk with one of these things. He's the only person that's ever brought down big game, as far as he knows, with an atlatl in the 20th century. And so, but it's quite effective. These things, they're just as fast as shooting an arrow from a recurve bow when you're hunting. Also, around the same time, people started to realize that if you're traveling around and the animals that you're following around and traveling around with are dying off, or they're traveling too fast for you, or other things like this, you're going to run out of food. And so they started to realize that we need to maybe plant some food that's going to be here when we need it, right? And so they started to domesticate plants. This was the first genetic engineering that happened on purpose. So they started off with this stuff called teosint, right? Which was the precursor to corn, very much like a green kind of plant, right? And it was these tiny little kernel, tiny little corn cobs, or whatever you might call them, about the size of a quarter on them. But what they did is they went around and they found the plants that had the biggest ones, and they took those and they planted them in one space, so they would have the biggest and the best ones in one space for them to use. And you know what they did the next year? They collected the biggest ones from their biggest ones, and they planted those the next year. And they kept doing that for thousands of years. And eventually, they have much bigger, biggest ones, right? And that is how genetic engineering still happens today in farming. In farming, they don't go in with a microscope and look at the gene and manipulate it with some 3D program. Nobody does that. They still do this. This is how genetic engineering happens. How do they make plants weed resistant? For the most part, until just a few years ago, for the most part, they planted corn and saw which ones were affected by the weeds the least, and then they took those seeds and they sold them as weed-resistant corn. It wasn't until recently when we started putting a ton of money into gene sequencers that they were actually able to isolate specific genes in specific plants that were weed-resistant, and then they started to cross-pollinate. So they take a corn and a soybean, and they would cross-pollinate, and they would create a new type of corn or a new type of soybean that was slightly more weed-resistant. And then it wasn't until very recently that they actually started manipulating the genes chemically. And it's a chemistry thing. It's not a go in and look at the gene and change it like it is in the movies. It's nothing like that. It's chemistry. It's pouring chemicals into bottles, and it's going through a reaction, and you change the gene using chemistry because it is a molecule. So genetic engineering, it's been around a long time, and for the most part, we still do it the same way today. It's not much different. Same thing with animals, right? It's the same exact thing with animals. You pick the best ones. You pick the best sheep, the fattest sheep, and you don't want them to have long legs. Why?
They can run away.
They run away, right? So you pick ones that have short, stunted legs, and you keep doing that generation after generation. They get shorter, shorter, shorter. You want ones that are fuzzy, so you pick the fuzzy ones, right? And eventually they change dramatically. You go from this sheep that can stand on a cliff, literally, on the vertical face of the cliff, and can avoid the hunters like nothing else. They're extremely difficult to kill, to a sheep that can hardly walk on flat ground because it's so fat and so fuzzy, but it's great for wool and it tastes really good when you roast it. Same with all of these animals, though. You have this very, very domesticated product like the almond, and then a very undomesticated thing like the acorn on oak. Can't eat an acorn, they're nasty. And they're also poisonous. But an almond, delicious. Probably the best thing ever to come off of a tree. Right? So when did some of this stuff happen? Where were the most ancient cultures on Earth? According to our understanding, some of the most ancient cultures on Earth are these blue ones here. So you've got this area here in the Mediterranean and Northern Africa, Southern Europe. It turns out, though, that there are some indications that some of those most ancient cultures were also over here on this southeastern area of America as well. But why was that? Well, because it's also an area that has a very similar kind of climate to this area. And so we don't know how they got there. We don't know where they really started. Most people believe that they started up here in this region, in the Africa region and the Mediterranean region, that these cultures and civilizations started there and maybe moved over here, but there are also some indications that maybe there were some here to begin with anyway. Don't really know. But then we have these cultures that are, the Mesopotamian culture, for example, is a very highly developed technological culture, and they were very early on probably the most civilized culture. Then you have ancient Egypt in here starting off, and a lot of these things overlapped. This ancient Egyptian culture and this Mesopotamian culture, they were right here close to each other, and they actually had a lot of interaction with each other. And then you have over here in India and China, you have these cultures that kind of were kind of far away, but still quite early. So we have some migration going on, right? And up here we have the ones that we know a little bit more about because there's more history that's written. Greek, Roman and Greek. And then we have the Mayan cultures, Incan cultures, right? The Aztecs over here in Central and South America. All of them defined by their engineering. All of them, all of the civilizations are defined by not their music, not their art, but their technology. That's what made them a civilization. That's what made them capable of defending themselves, feeding themselves. All of them were agricultural-based societies. None of them were hunter-gatherer societies. Because you have to have agriculture, and agriculture requires engineering, planning, engineering and genetic engineering and all this domestication. So it's all about technologies, where these things came from. Of course, the Romans are known very much for their technology. And look how short their civilization was, and look how further along it was. The Mesopotamians were extremely technological, and very early on, right? And then, of course, you come out here to America, and you have these cultures in here that we're still really learning about. Some of their technology was amazing. Indoor plumbing, irrigation systems that took water from, sea level up to 1,000 feet above sea level and things like this. Just amazing things that were just phenomenally technological engineering feats. Here's kind of a zooming in on this area where a lot of this stuff began. You can see where it is relative to some of the stuff that we have today: Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Iran, Turkey. And you think it's kind of almost ironic, because these regions now are vastly desolate regions, lots and lots of desert, lots of what you could maybe call undeveloped countries. There's quite a few of them. Most of them nowadays make their money by pumping oil out of the ground and selling oil. They don't have really any technologies that they sell or that they make or that they invent anymore. But that's because this is a very different region than it was then. This region was not, back then, a big desert region. It had lots of resources. And it still does have a fair amount of mineral resources and even agricultural resources that are being developed again now. But another problem with this region is that because it is so old, the histories here are very old. And so there's a lot of very old wars. The wars that we see in the Middle East they weren't started 100 years ago or 50 years ago. They were started 5,000 years ago. And they're still running. They're still going. So here we have it, 6,000 BC, the scratch plow, essentially just a big wedge kind of pulled along by whatever animals you could pull it with, sometimes by humans. And they were able to break up hard soil and start farming in areas that normally weren't farmed. Right? So much so much land was changed by these very simple things. But in addition to that, it also changed the industry of the community, because there needed to be people that had to build the plow. There needed to be people that were raising the animals to pull the plow. There needed to be people that were feeding the animals to pull the plow. Because the farmer didn't have time to do all of that, because now he was doing a lot more farming because he could break up a lot more ground. So the farmer stopped doing all these things on his own, and other people started having jobs that were tied to these things. The loom, right? Instead of cutting the skin off the animals, why don't we take some of these fibers from some of these plants that are growing, and we'll cultivate those plants as well, do some engineering with those plants, and we'll make fibers that will make softer clothes that breathe nice and aren't sweaty on the inside because they're made of leather. I mean, it was a much nicer world to live in once they started figuring these things out. You know, the Bronze Age is very, very famous. We always hear about the Bronze Age. What was it? It was the time when we started to be able to make things out of metal by mixing metals together to make alloys that could be beaten, shaped, formed, poured, all kinds of things. Okay? And bronze was one of the first alloys. Here we have the invention of the wheel, right? How do you invent a wheel? Well, you start pushing things along with a roller underneath. You start using sleds, and maybe we'll use a sled on the roller, then maybe we'll put some little holes in the roller so the sled doesn't, slide back and forth on it. And then, of course, the evolution becomes quite obvious, right? Evolution of the wheel to the handcart kind of thing. Construction, right? The Code of Hammurabi. Right? This was the beginning of engineering ethics, as it's called, right? How we're going to have some kind of set of laws or rules for building things and who's owning things and how. I mean, these rules are kind of harsh if you read through them, talking about putting people to death for not building something right? But essentially to have some kind of rules so that things are built well, so that things are built right, so the people that are building things for money are not just ripping you off, but they're giving you something of value. Civil engineering, of course. 3000 BC, the ziggurat, the first ziggurat in recorded history is in the Bible, the Tower of Babel. The first one that we know from records are some of the tiered pyramids of South and Central America. Right? The biggest one being in South America, Peru maybe. It's the biggest pyramid on Earth. But ziggurats are essentially these structures that are big on the bottom. They get smaller and smaller as they go up and up and up and up, and they just build them super tall, right? And ancient Egypt. So many things in ancient Egypt. Irrigation being first among them, probably. Egypt essentially consists of this huge desert region. It's been this way for a long time. And right down through the middle of the desert is one of the biggest rivers in the world. And that's the fertile area of Egypt. That's the only place you can grow things at all, right? The first thing that they discovered was that they could actually make plots of land down here and keep track of whose was whose. But they did that by inventing the right triangle, or by discovering how right triangles work. They invented a square, and they were able to go out and do surveying. Because the problem was that this area down here gets completely flooded once a year. Up here where the headwaters of the Nile are, up in Abyssinia, you have this ton of water coming down out of the mountains. It's from snow and rain, and it just floods this entire area, and everything gets wiped out. Every fence, every house that you put down there just gets totally wiped out. So people stopped living down there and farmed down there. But they would live up here on the edges of this, and they would go down into that area to do their farming, because that's where all that great water was, all the great soil that got washed down the river was. And eventually they started to branch out. They started building little tiny rivers away from here out of stone, so that they could move the water, move that basin out wider, make use of all that water, because you can see how much water gets out to the ocean. This thing gets so big out here, and it's just a huge amount of water going into the Mediterranean. More and more pyramids they're talking about. Talking about how they built them. They're talking about ships. Of course, ships being very important, because 1500 BC they're building ships that are capable of crossing oceans. We're talking about Greece, because Greece had their entire empire essentially was out in the middle of the Mediterranean. But if you talk about the Vikings, they're the ones that discovered America the first time. Long before Columbus came here, about this time, about 1500 BC or so. They were out there crossing the North Atlantic Ocean. So, actually it might not have been that early, but it was pretty early. I'm not a history buff. The Iron Age, again, essentially was just another step forward. They were able to use hotter and hotter fires to make more and more different alloys. And when they started extracting iron from iron ore, they were able to make all kinds of much stronger structures. Of course, probably the most famous iron structure in the world that is made of cast iron is probably the Eiffel Tower. It's made completely of cast iron. No steel in the tower. And here you have artificial harbors made of stone and other things as well. This is pretty amazing, actually. First lighthouse, 300 BC, right? Protect ships at sea from running into rocks. Tunnels for water. This is an aqueduct. We have tunnels that would go underneath mountains, right? It's half a mile long, goes underneath a mountain to transport water from one place to another. Then you get into really fancy weapons, crossbows, catapults. The Archimedes screw pump. You could raise water from a lower part to a higher point. And water wheels and rows and arches and bearings and all kinds of things that were invented until you get up to these more modern times. 1800s, you're talking about bicycles, machine guns. Right? The first machine gun was 1862. Believe it or not, it was built in time to be used in the Civil War. I don't think it ever was, actually. But Gatling actually invented this he invented this machine gun so that you could reduce the size of armies, so that you have fewer people killing each other. It kind of worked. Metal bicycle, right? And you can see this progression is across the board. It changes how we move. It changes how we think. It changes how we speak, how we communicate in other ways. It changes how we cook. It changes how we eat. It changes how we dress. It changes how we live. It changes everything. This is the driving factor of humanity. Technology and engineering. There is nothing else out there that compares. People love to say it. They love to say philosophy is what made man great. Baloney. Men never even thought about anything except feeding themselves until they could feed themselves. Philosophy had nothing to do with it. Right? And nobody sat around making cave paintings until they had time to sit around making cave paintings because they figured out how to plant food. Okay? Nobody did anything like that. Nobody had leisure time, and we still don't. Nobody does things that are unnecessary unless they have time to waste. And so technology and engineering is what makes our culture and makes civilization in general capable of moving on to things like art, pleasure, anything. All these things that we can do just for fun are things that we do because we have time after we've made our lives a little bit simpler, easier, I guess you could say, due to technology. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes our technology ends up taking more of our time, like cell phones, for example. But that's okay. So, that is a quick history of engineering. I mean, now we're at a point where we have so much technology, so much that we can take completely for granted some of the most important things, which are what we saw in this video. We take it completely for granted that we can move from here to our home that is 5 miles away in less than half a day. I mean, it's just 5 miles away, 10 minutes, no problem. Even on a bicycle, I can go 5 miles in less than an hour. And we just take it completely for granted. And nobody would ever think of going to a place like Kearney on a weekend or on a day. 100 years ago, it was just unheard of. You just didn't do it because it would take all day, or sometimes 2 or 3 days if it was 150 years ago. So we really are in a very different age where technology is taken completely for granted, engineers are taken completely for granted, and yet we are still the driving force of humanity. We still change everything that happens on this earth. Sounds a little bit, self-righteous and big-headed, but it's not that. It's just true. And that is important to understand because we're doing important things. No matter what we do as engineers, we really are doing very important stuff for all of mankind. And we need to take it seriously. And sometimes it's just plain fun. So let's go ahead and, let's see here, how do I get out of this? I think I hit escape on this keyboard. There we go. Let's go ahead and see what our book has to show us. We've got some fun things in the first chapter about engineering. The first chapter is called Preparing to be an Engineer. And in our syllabus, I think we're doing all of chapter 1 today. Let's just check that and make sure. So on 9.3, we're doing chapter 1, and you have some homework. Chapter 1, problems 1 through 6 and 9 through 11. Let's look at those really quick there. Page, page zero. I'm going to switch this over to my overhead projector so you can see what I'm looking at. There we go. So if you go to the end, so it's page 16 here, and if you go to the bottom of this page, you have these problems, 1 through 6, right, and then what did I say, 9 through 11. I want them typed, and you can either print them off and give them to me, or you can email them to me. But you're preparing a list of your short range, intermediate range, and long range goals. A list of your strengths and weaknesses. Stuff like this. So we're talking about what you're doing and what you need to be doing to become an engineer. And hopefully a little bit of this history will kind of give you an idea of where to start. But really we're going to talk about it in this chapter. It's not that difficult. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's a lot about education. So let's take a look. Let's look first at a comic. We can get this zoom in here. Let's look at this great comic strip. Zits. Boom. Too far. I don't like these new overhead projectors they put in here. Anyway. Okay, so it says here, it's so unfair of you to make me do my own laundry. He's talking to his mother. None of my friends have to do their own laundry. And then it says, he keeps on by saying, how about Amnesty International would love to hear from a teenager who's forced to do his own laundry. Then he talks to his girlfriend later and says, I do my own laundry now. And then she says, that is so amazingly mature of you. It's all about perspective, right? From one perspective, this person is complaining they have to do their own work. The other end of the spectrum, they're so proud of it that they're doing their own work. Really, we want to be that second perspective, right? You have a lot of work to do as an engineer. One of the reasons that I created this class was to help students understand what engineering is all about. And one of the things that engineering is all about is a lot of education. A lot of homework, a lot of time, a lot of math, a lot of science, and a lot of education. Okay? You have to know a lot more than the average college graduate. And again, that sounds big-headed, but it's just absolutely true. Most engineers will start in a math class that most college students will never even take because they'll never qualify to take it. Okay? That's the first class of the real engineering program really is Calculus 1. And we try to get our students ready for that class here at the college so that they can get into it and take it before they leave. But that's the beginning. Not the end, it's the beginning. After that, you still have 5 or 6 more math classes to take from the math department, and a good half dozen to take from the engineering department. That's just math. We're not talking about engineering classes yet. Okay? Engineers generally, when they have to take classes outside of engineering or math or the physics department, are so relieved. oh good, I get to go to my history class or my other class that everybody else is worried about, because it becomes such less stress and work. Well, they get to sit back and listen to somebody talk about history instead of trying to bang their head against some math problem that's going to take them 2 hours just to finish. And they get to write a paper, I finally get to write a paper. I'm not just doing crazy math problems. It's like a relief to go to these other classes that so many students are stressing over. Engineers are so relaxed in those classes because they're just so nice to do something that's not so difficult. So it's a very different world to be in, and you have to understand that before you even get started. You also have to understand that there's kind of a two-sided thing here. This section here talks about you must overcome defeats and obstacles more on your own. Right? That has to do with that laundry cartoon as well. You have to learn to do things for yourself, but you also have to learn to get help whenever and wherever you can. Right? So you're going to have a lot of things that you're going to have to overcome. You're going to have to learn math a lot. You're going to have to learn sciences a lot. You're going to have to learn how to work hard and learn how to get through crazy assignments. But you're also going to have to learn to work with people, because sometimes that's the only way you can get through it. Sometimes you're going to have to get help from somebody who knows it and you don't. Or you're going to have to go to a teacher for help. A lot of these things involve management, managing time. That means being organized. There aren't any engineers out there that aren't organized with their time. Not any successful ones anyway. And so you have to learn to use a calendar. You have to learn to use a planner of some kind. We have an advantage today with our technology. Most people carry around a smartphone of some kind. Smartphones have great apps on them for keeping you organized, and they can even yell at you when you need to do something. Start using those and start learning to use them. Start putting your homework assignments, your due dates into a calendar with alerts that tell you homework is due in 3 hours. Get it done. Start learning that. You have to manage your money. Why? Because you're going to be in school longer than most people, which means it's going to cost you more than most people. The upside is that when you get into graduate school, they'll pay you to go to school. Okay? But you have to get there. Another upside is that there are a lot of scholarships for engineers, but there are also a lot of engineers vying for those scholarships. So there are a lot of opportunities to get your schooling paid for, but you have to work for them. You have to find them. And most of those opportunities involve a trade-off. Most of those opportunities are you're going to work in a laboratory for 10 hours a week or 15 or 20 hours a week, and then we'll pay for your schooling. It's not necessarily just free money. And that's how I got through school. I got through school by finding the opportunities, managing my money well, finding opportunities to get money, but almost every one of those opportunities involved me giving something else. Sometimes I was grading papers, sometimes I was teaching a class, sometimes I was in a laboratory, sometimes I was sweeping floors. But whatever it was, I looked for those opportunities so that I could make that money work, because I was in school for a while. Got to get along with people. It goes back to working with people. You're going to have to work with people in many cases, and you're going to want to work with people in the other cases, because engineering is hard. Okay? This guy really loves zits. Here he's talking about eating his dinner, but he's actually inhaling his dinner. He eats it between the fridge and even getting out of the kitchen. He's already eaten his meal. And then down here, he smashes up a bag of chips, puts it into a jar of salsa, shakes it up and drinks it, because it's more efficient, right? Eating is sometimes that way as an engineer. I cannot tell you how many times I saw engineers doing weird things with their food because it was so much more efficient. It was faster and easier. One of my favorite ones was a friend of mine who would go to Burger King every time they had 2-for-1 Whoppers. And he would buy like 8 Whoppers. And then he would stick them in his fridge. And he would just take them out and microwave the lettuce and all, and mayonnaise, and just warm lettuce and warm mayonnaise and eat Whoppers for like a week. It was just crazy. But he's like, it's cheap and it's easy. And it's a fairly decent meal actually. It has has your starches and it has your proteins and has a tomato and an onion in it, so it gives you a little bit of But I recommend that you learn how to take care of yourself health-wise, right? That also includes, not only includes eating correctly, but sleeping correctly. Engineers have this tendency to stay up late to do work and then get up early and do work, and then they burn out. They'll burn out for a month at a time sometimes. And you really don't want to burn out. And so what I did is I said, one day a week, I'm not going to even touch homework. All day long. From morning until, like from the time I get up till the time to go to bed, I'm not even going to think about homework. One day a week. It was Sunday. I said, Sunday is truly going to be my day of rest from school. And I never touched work on Sunday. I never touched schoolwork on Sunday. And it was beautiful. The rest of the week, I was going. And I was probably getting 5-6 hours of sleep a night, which is pretty long for an engineer or a scientist in school. So I was doing pretty good sleep-wise. And I was young enough that I could get away with it. But I would recommend having a schedule and having a break every week. Okay? Learn these things. And this will help you here when you're at community college level as well, because you're still working hard. Get into these habits early, and you don't have to try to get into them later. These next few sections, they talk about the classroom. It's not Kansas either, right? The Emerald City, where is it you're going again? And then the Yellow Brick Road right here. So they're obviously doing a little nod to Dorothy and whatever land it was, right? I'm sorry? Wizard of Oz, right? In the Land of Oz, right? So obviously nodding, giving a nod to that. Why are they doing that? Well, that's sometimes how it feels, right? You get into a program and you're like, where the heck am I? I have no idea where I am, what I'm doing, where I'm going. And it's very easy to get lost. So you need to kind of understand and remember and plan so that you know why you're there. I'm here because I want this kind of degree and I want to go into this kind of field. And that may or may not change during the course of your education. But always have it in mind. Don't just say I'm going to be here because sounds like a good field and I'll eventually make some money. That's never a good way to be anywhere. You really want to have a plan for your future. I'll tell you this, my plan for my future, I thought I knew what it was right up until it wasn't. Okay? But I had a plan. And so I was studying and I was looking towards that plan. I was looking for opportunities that would take me there. And eventually an opportunity came along that I didn't expect that took me here, where I am today. And it was the place I actually really wanted to be. I just didn't know it. But if you're not planning at all and you're not looking for opportunities, I guarantee you won't find them. Because if you don't aim, I guarantee you'll never hit anything. Right? You have to aim for something in order to hit anything. And that's what they're talking about in these next few sections. Have some kind of plan and some kind of goal for your future. Okay? Something fairly specific, not necessarily all totally specific. But, when you start off, you may think, I want to be an automotive engineer and design cars. Great. Figure out what intermediate goals you need to accomplish to get there. Figure out what kind of engineer becomes an automotive engineer. Figure out maybe if there are several kinds of engineers who become automotive engineers, what kind you might want to be. Maybe you want to be an electrical engineer because you're more interested in the electrical systems of the car than you are interested in the engine of the car. Well, guess what? The engine is half electrical now, so maybe that's kind of a crossover. Or maybe you're more interested in the design of the body of the car than the engine of the car. Those are completely different fields. Okay? So, lots of things to think about. They have an entire section on study skills, right? And I love these Calvin and Hobbes comics because they just make so much fun of study skills. But they're so true, right? Aren't you supposed to be doing homework now? I quit doing homework. Homework is bad for my self-esteem, right? At the end, he goes off on this rant about how doing homework doesn't help him become a better person. And he calls it, at the end he says he's informationally impaired, right? And that is exactly what so many students are. So many students go through college just getting grades They never really learn anything. They're informationally and they're educationally and they're intellectually impaired at the end, even though they got their degree and they graduated with a 4.0. We're not in college to get grades. That is a result of the fact that they want to evaluate how much we're learning. We're in college to learn. So get out there and learn. Take the time to learn. Take the effort to learn. And the best way to do that is to learn how to learn. This is what we call study skills. They have several sections here in their study skills section that you probably want to go through. The first one here is at the bottom of this page. Arrive at class prepared. No, sorry, that's the second one. First one's on this page. There we go. Create a good environment, right? This good environment doesn't just include your study environment at home, where you do your homework. It includes your environment everywhere. So it's essentially who you are and how you carry yourself. And you come into a classroom. If you come into a classroom with your coffee and your computer open to Facebook and a bunch of things on your desk that are distracting, you're probably not going to be a very good student in the classroom. Your environment sucks, and it's just your desk, right? So your environment includes a lot of different things. Your environment is essentially your life and how you live it. If you're living in a way that encourages studying and encourages learning, then it's a good environment. If it distracts you, not a good environment. Arriving at class prepared is, of course, important. Don't just show up to class and figure it out on the way. Figure it out when you're there. Study. All it took for me was 5 or 10 minutes before class. I would look through the material, say, what are we doing today? Maybe to just get my brain flowing so that I'm not lost when I get there. I'm not trying to catch up. Maybe look at a few equations. Maybe read a couple of things. I didn't read things for more than a few minutes. Just a few minutes before class most of the time. Sometimes I knew that there was a big thing coming up in class that I was going to have to really study for, so I would take some time. Mostly, I just did all my work. Because doing homework in a class every day, instead of just saving it to the moment it's due, helps you to prepare for the class, because they're going to talk about that in the class. The stuff that you do in your homework is the stuff you talk about in class, in a good class. Take good notes. Notice it doesn't say take a lot of notes. Notice it doesn't say take comprehensive notes. Notice it doesn't say take every note of everything that's ever been said. Right? Taking good notes means that you write down the things that are important. And maybe they're not in class. Maybe there's something that you just thought of while you were listening in class. Most of the time when I take notes, I write down some basic highlights of what's been talked about. If there's something really important that I can tell I'm going to need, I definitely take some pretty good notes on that. But then the rest of my notes, probably half of them, 50% or more, are things that I thought of while I was listening. Things that started to make sense to me. The connections that I made. Maybe it's a question that I have. Those are my notes. They're usually my thoughts, not the teacher's. But they're definitely coming from what the teacher is saying. Get the most out of your textbooks. I think, textbooks are kind of lame, personally, because I think they're written badly. But if you have a textbook, you should get the most out of it. You should learn how to mark things in it that are important. You should learn how to find things in it that are important. I personally like to use sticky notes. I like to put sticky notes at the top like little bookmarks. And then I write on the sticky note what that bookmark is about so that I can kind of flip through them on the top. And if I get really crazy, there's some on the bottom and the sides too. I just like that. And nowadays you have ebooks that you can do that with, that you don't ever have to have them sticking out on the top and bottom because it's an ebook. I love ebooks. We don't use them in this class because it's not available very easily. But work many problems. You won't have that problem in most engineering courses. If you're doing the homework, you're going to work many problems, okay? But it's important to always practice what you're doing. Practice, practice, practice. And practice it completely. Don't try to make shortcuts or skip things, cut corners. Get it done correctly and completely. Use repetition again. I love that because, repetition again. Doing things over and over and over is how your brain works. It's how your brain learns. Okay? People who are great basketball players were not born that way. Believe it or not, none of them were. They were all playing basketball at the age of 1. And why did they become good? Because they've been playing 10 times longer when they were 11 than most kids when they're 11. Because most kids have only been playing for a year when they're 11. And the good ones have been playing for 10 years when they're 11. It's repetition that makes great. Okay? And it doesn't mean that since you're just starting engineering, you can't be great at it because you didn't start when you were 1. Right? It just means that you need to put in a lot of time right now. And a lot of time for the rest of your life in engineering. So if you want to be a great engineer, what do? You start getting engineering magazines. There's a great one online called Gizmag. Okay? It's a technology magazine about the latest innovations coming out. It's not necessarily an engineering publication, but it gets you excited about the things that are being done by engineers. Gizmag.com, I recommend you go sign up for it. It's free. Go straight to your email box. Popular Science is another one that's fun to read. Popular Mechanics is another fun one to read. Those are popular magazines, but as engineers, you can actually go sign up for a free membership in engineering societies. A lot of engineering societies have free memberships, and they'll send you their real, honest-to-goodness engineering publications. So it's articles written by engineers, for engineers. And you can start to read what real engineers do and how they write about it. Good engineering societies include, there's the International Electrical Engineering Society, there's the American Society of Mechanical Engineers or something like this, ASME. There's lots of them out there. If you just put in the type of engineering you're interested in and Google it, you'll find these societies. And go find out what the student membership costs. Usually it's very cheap or free. So take advantage. If you have questions about how to do that, come talk to me. I'll help you find some and we'll get you going. But more and more, the more that you immerse yourself in engineering, the better you will be at it. Good point. Learn how to take exams. Right here it says to master exams, right? Time management skills. These are all things that we learn in school, right? Here they show this nice little graphic of kinds of classes you'll take while you're in engineering, right? Where you have all these different types of classes up here. This is an engineering class, a math class, a physics class, biology, chemistry, and you even have a history up here somewhere. There's an H somewhere. But I mean, as you get further and further down this tree, further towards your later years, you're using just the engineering, the math, the physics kind of stuff. You're just doing the science, the math, and the engineering. There's a great little calendar where they show you how one student plans out their day. I had to do this when I started school. I had to have a calendar, and I still have one today that I use because it gets so hard when you start doing lots of physics and lots of engineering, lots of math in a single day. It can be really painful. And so here the darker places are places that he has to be. This is a class, this is a class, this is a class, math lab, this is like physics lab. Right? These are places he has to be. These are other things that he does, and I guarantee you that he adhered to it pretty well. Notice that his eating is fairly consistent at almost the same time every day. That's very good for health, very important for health. Right? Gives you a little bit of a break, and make sure that you have the energy and nutrition that you need. Teamwork and using resources, right? So teamwork, they talk about working with other students, working with teachers, working with mentors, whoever else. You're going to need it. We used to make a joke that when we got our degree, we would share our degrees with each other. And because we have helped each other so much. You will spend so much time working with other people. Get used to doing it now so that you don't have to get used to it when you're at a university. Take opportunity to talk to students and say, when are you doing your homework? You want to work together? Let's get a homework group together, especially in the math classes, the physics classes, and the chemistry classes. Those ones tend to be the hardest classes that you'll take early on. Later on, it'll be engineering. But those hard ones at first are the tough ones. And then using other resources. I can't seem to get this on now. There we go. Using other resources. Mentors, right? Sometimes they're professors, sometimes they're older students, whatever. Tutors, books, textbooks, other books, online websites, all kinds of things. You have libraries, teaching assistants, professors, so many resources out there to use. Use them, right? Use them. There are a lot of online resources as well for your education. So that's chapter 1, essentially how you're going to need to live your life to become an engineer for the next few years. So take these things into account. Go and do some of those homework problems that are going to help you practice some of these things. And then we'll meet again on Friday, and we'll take a step into chapter 2.